Greetings. Do without wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome back to another Magick Without Tears video. Today we're going to be diving straight into a topic I love in Chapter 5, the universe, the 0 equals 2 equation. Let's begin. In this chapter, Crowley is going to give a dissertation about the philosophies of nihilism, monotheism, and dualism as modes of religious thought, which the formula of 0 equals 2 reconciles in many ways. So, I figure I'll open up with my own breakdown of the concept of 0 equals 2, and then go over everything in the chapter piecemeal as he goes into many different subjects that all touch on 0 equals 2, but also goes a little bit outside the bounds of that. So, for like a semi-brief definition of what 0 equals 2 is. Number, as I've said many times, is very important in thelemic studies because each number is treated as a symbol or idea unto itself. Knowing and understanding these symbols, one can analyze nature and learn how to align themselves with it. The number 0 represents the precursor to existence, nothingness, the primal source from whence something happened to come. In Kabbalah, we call it the Ein Sof. Some might call it silence, absolute attainment, perfect detachment, Pan, Aum, Chronos, or as Crowley places in the Book of Thoth, the Tao. It is all of these, but really it is none of these. The 0 of our Arabic numerals is in the shape of a circle. It represents nothingness, but is simultaneously an ever-turning circle with no point of origin and no end. It is an ever-present, never-present source of this illusory existence we find ourselves in at present, an untapped, limitless potential. Now for the 2 in the equation. 2 basically signifies the modern-day equivalent of Plato's thesis on duality, but with the addition of, in the physical plane as well as the spiritual plane, having opposites which end up canceling each other out, as I'll talk about momentarily. This too, in short, that there is the seen world which we interact with via our mind, and the unseen world which we interact with but are pretty much unaware of until you end up getting into some type of occult studies or what have you. The seen is obvious. And though the universe is complex, even a layman can see it and study something about the physical universe. The unseen is just as complex, but can only be perceived, at least on the astral plane up to a certain point, and then past that point can only be understood but never known. Essentially, the Tree of Life outlines all the different planes and boundaries of mind and body, as well as what's beyond them. So, putting these numbers together in the equation, it is a simple design that encompasses our physical reality, as well as the source beyond the veils of Ein Sof, and communicates that these are exactly the same. That when you can fully grasp the implications of this, you can interact directly with the source through the illusory physical world, consisting of dualities which cancel each other out, as again we'll talk about momentarily. The equivalent to 0 equals 2 would be +1 plus -1 equals 0. Now what this all boils down to, it's alluding to the creation of the universe and existence as it stands now. That when we think of the 0 as the veils of Ein Sof, or that which is beyond them, and the 2 as the descent of the light into physical reality, this may be confusing to those who are just beginning their studies. It doesn't mean that God is external to the universe or even to the individual, nor does the light actually descend or move in any particular direction, especially not downward. It is more about the light changing from invisible to opaque substance, but also considering where this light originated from in the first place. This doesn't mean that the source created this plane as an external place, rather that it changed forms and is present, though concealed, within all things on this plane. Absolutely unknowable. But therefore, by observing the physical world, which is the product and vessel of the source. That said light, though it's impossible to know, we can make certain inferences based on that which conceals it. Thus, as occultists, we observe nature, both our own and the world's. And by observing that nature, we're able to see the nature of that which cannot be known. I was looking for a quote by Crowley, but couldn't exactly find it, so I'll do my best to paraphrase without butchering it. It's something to the effect that the Taoists understood that the Tao is a limitless resource of nothingness, and that all things can be drawn and manifested from this nothingness into the physical world. We'll get more into the Taoist section at the end of the chapter. For now, let's move on and see what Crowley is actually talking about. Quote, Kara Sora, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Yes, I admit everything. It is all my fault. Looking over my past writings, I do see that my only one-pointed attempt to set forth a sound ontology was my early fumbling letter brochure Bereshith. Since then, I seem to have kept assuming that everybody knew all about it, referring to it, quoting it, but never sitting down seriously to demonstrate the thesis or even to state it in set terms. Chapter 0 of Magic in Theory and Practice skates gently over it. The Naples arrangement in the Book of Thoth dodges it with really diabolical ingenuity. I ask myself why. It is exceedingly strange because every time I think of the equation, I am thrilled with a keen glow of satisfaction that is this sempiternal riddle of the Sphinx should have been answered at last. End quote. Crowley then goes on to list 19 postulates, lettered A through S. Due to spatial concerns, I am, cutting out a little bit of it, but we are going to go over most of the chapter. The rest, you should read the chapter on your own, and then probably listen to this video after, and then reread the chapter at some point, but you could just listen along for now if you'd like. So, point A, quote, we are aware. B, we cannot doubt the existence, whether real or illusory, of something, because doubt itself is a form of awareness, end quote. Basically, even though the physical world is a mere symptom of the source, and the division of the singularity is but an illusion, we have individual points of consciousness. We exist as we are, and well, if you're going to play the game and incarnate, then you are bound to the rules of that game as they are. We can see, feel, smell, taste, that which is physical, and our subjective experience gives an awareness of the objective. Cause and effect would not respond as they did without said rules of existence in place. Quote, letter C, we dump together all of that which we are aware under the convenient name of existence or the universe. Cosmos is not so good for this purpose. The word implies order, which, in the present state of our argument, is a mere assumption. Point D, we also tend to think of the universe as containing things of which we are not aware. But this is altogether unjustifiable, although it is difficult to think at all without making some such assumption. For instance, one may come upon a new branch of knowledge, say, histology, or Hammurabi, or the language of the Iroquois, or the poems of the hermaphrodite of Panormida. It seems to be they're already waiting for us. We simply cannot believe that we are making it all up as we go along. For all that, it is sheer sophistry. We may merely be unfolding the contents of our own minds. Then again, does a thing cease to exist if we forget it? The answer is that one cannot be sure. Personally, I feel convinced of the existence of an universe outside of my own immediate awareness. But it is true, even so, that it does not exist for me unless and until it takes place as part of my consciousness, end quote. So this is part of a long-standing philosophical debate, something akin to today's argument of, are we living in a matrix that, like a modern-day video game, only renders that which we are able to perceive while playing in our character or human body, and it would be like playing on a screen, while the rest of the game world is unloaded, not rendered, unless we turn to view it. And this is in order to save processing speed. So this argument that Crowley makes, or he brings up rather, is very much akin to that concept. So this is not a new concept, it's just changed terminology, but it's the same exact philosophical debate. For myself, there's no answer to either of these debates of whether things exist when unperceived, but for myself, I do think it is only an ego problem in thinking one experience is so vital that nothing exists without the individual directly perceiving it. So I'm also in favor of the idea that there's an objective reality, whether I'm perceiving it or not. Yeah, I've heard even people make the debate, what's behind you doesn't exist because you're not looking behind you. I just think it's kind of silly. Ultimately, because then where would the randomness, if somebody walks up, you could still hear them behind you. So if whatever's behind you doesn't exist, well then how did things come up behind you? Doesn't make any sense. Quote, point E. All this paragraph D is in the nature of a digression. For what you may think of it does not at all touch the argument of this letter, but it had to be put in just to prevent your mind from raising irrelevant objections. Let me continue then from point C. Point F. Something is. This something appears incalculably vast and complex. How did it come to be? This, briefly, is the riddle of the universe, which has been always the first preoccupation of all serious philosophers since men began to think at all, end quote. Where did this first something come to be? Where did the something come if it came from a nothing? It's also the problem of the physics community. They claim that there was a singularity before the Big Bang, but then what made the Big Bang? What made that singularity? Well, they say there's a multiverse of universes popping in and out of existence with many Big Bangs, much as a virtual particle in quantum field theory pops in and out of a void spontaneously. But then what started this process, and where was the first universe? What began this popping in and out of universes and particles and all of the rest? Where is the space that all of these things exist on? And what created that plane? If there was something that created that plane, what created that thing? Point G. The orthodox idiot answer, usually wrapped up in obscure terms in the hope of concealing from the inquirer the fact that it is not an answer at all, but an evasion, is God created it. Then obviously, who created God? Sometimes we have a demiurge, a creative God behind whom is an eternal formless greatness, anything to confuse the issue. Sometimes the universe is supported by an elephant. He, in turn, stands on a tortoise. But by that time, it is hoped that the inquirer is too tired and muddled to ask what holds up the tortoise. Sometimes a great father and mother crystallize out of some huge cloudy confusion of elements, and so on. But nobody answers the question, at least none of these God-inventing mules with their incurably commonplace minds. Point H. Serious philosophy has always begun by discarding all these probabilities. It has of necessity been divided into these schools, the Nihilist, the Monist, and the Dualist, end quote. And now we're going to get into the meat and taters. Forgive me, but I'll be reading again another long quote from the chapter here. Point J, quote, the monist or atavist school is at once subtler and more refined. It seems to approach the ultimate reality as opposed to the superficial examination of the dualist more closely. It seems to me that this doctrine is based upon a sorites of doubtful validity. To tell you the hideously shameful truth, I hate this doctrine so rabidly that I could hardly trust myself to present it fairly, but I will try. Meanwhile, you can study it in the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, in Ernst Haeckel's The Riddle of the Universe, and dozens of other classics. The dogma appears to excite its dupes to dithyrambs. I have to admit the poetry of the idea, but there is something in me which vehemently rejects it with excruciating and vindictive violence. Possibly this is because part of our own system runs parallel with the first equation of theirs. Point K. The monists perceive quite clearly and correctly that it is absurd to answer the question, how came these many things of which we are aware to be? By saying that they came from many, and many in this connection includes two. The universe must therefore be a single phenomenon. Make it eternal in all the rest of it, i.e., remove all limit of every kind. And the universe explains itself. How then can opposites exist, as we observe them to do? Is it not the very essence of our original soul rights that the many must be reducible to the one? They see how awkward this is, so the devil of the dualist is emulsified and evaporated into illusion, what they call Maya or some equivalent term. Reality for them consists solely of Brahman, the supreme being, without quantity or quality. They are compelled to deny him all attributes, even that of existence. For to do so would instantly limit them, and so hurl them headlong back into dualism. Point M. Beyond Vishvaru Padarshana, the vision of the formless Vishnu, beyond that yet loftier vision, which corresponds in Hindu classification to our knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, is that called Atma Darshana, the vision or apprehension, of a much better word, of the universe as a single phenomenon, outside all limitations, whether of time, space, causality, or whatnot. Very good then. Here we are with direct realization of the atavist theory of the universe. Everything fits perfectly. Also, when I say realization, I want you to understand that I mean what I say in a sense so intense and so absolute that it is impossible to convey my meaning to anyone who has not undergone that experience. How do we judge the reality of an ordinary impression upon consciousness? Chiefly by its intensity, by its persistence, by the fact that nobody can argue us out of our belief in it. As people said of Berkeley's idealism, his arguments are irrefutable, but they fail to carry conviction. No skeptical, no idealist queries can persuade us that a kick in the pants is not real in any reasonable sense of the word. Moreover, memory reassures us. However vivid a dream may be at the time, however it may persist throughout the years, though it is rare for any dream, unless frequently repeated or linked to waking impressions by some happy conjunction of circumstances, to remain long in the mind with any clear-cut vision, it is hardly ever mistaken for an event of actual life. Good. Then, as waking life is to dream, so, yes, more so, is religious experience as above described to that life common to us all. It is not merely easy, it is natural. Not merely natural, but inevitable, for anyone who has experienced samadhi, this word conveniently groups the higher types of vision, to regard normal life as illusion, by comparison with this state in which all problems are resolved, all doubts driven out, all limitations abolished. Moreover, is it really adequate to postulate an origin of the universe as they inevitably do? Merely to deny that there ever was a beginning by saying that this one is eternal fails to satisfy me. End quote. Okay, hopefully that makes clear enough Crowley's take on monotheism. If there is a belief that the created universe comes from one eternal thing, which always is, then its creation consisting of opposites is contradictory to its own nature. The creation would exist separate from it. Further, these systems of thought never explain where the one thing came from and give up ever answering that question, conceding to a lame, well, it's eternal. I glossed over it, but Crowley mentions a serious danger that monotheistic religions pose to their practitioners. Since everything is coming from a singular God at the source, the fanatics raise themselves up with religious frenzy into a trance state where they conjure a vision of their God, and thereby confirm to themselves by their own prejudice seated in their unconscious mind that this vision proves their belief is the correct one. Quote, "We have seen that two, or many, are unsatisfactory as origin, if only because they can always be reduced to one, and one itself is no better, because, among other things, it finds itself forced to deny the very premises on which it was founded. Shall we be any better off if we assume that ex nihilo nihil fit, nothing comes from nothing, is a falsehood, that the origin of all things is nothing? Shall we first glance at the mathematical aspect of nothing?" Crowley goes on, end quote. Crowley goes on to give a plethora of equations of mathematical philosophy. I'll do my best to simply summarize the results of his arguments, to save you from, reading a bunch of equations on your screen. So in short, think of any quality of an object as a dimension, its length, width, height, color, velocity, whether it can conduct electricity or not, etc., etc. take the term x times 1, being the object with one dimension, take that as a line. x2, a flat shape, such as a square. x3 as a three-dimensional shape, say a cube. But at x4 we become stuck, so whether you agree with x4 as time, or you assign some other quality to the 4, anything beyond 3 has nothing to do with its shape. But, you could do x4, x5 as other qualities, as I mentioned, velocity, potentials, color, shape, smell, whatever you could measure about it in any given sense. Regardless, all these are measurable in some sense. They can never exist without going below 1. Therefore, if an object is described as x0, how can any quality be assigned or stem from such a thing? That x, if it has 0 qualities, does not exist. Ultimately, that nothing still holds the quality of absence. In my words, not his. And despite the equations listed, we end up back at 1. Quote, and if our nothing is to be absolute nothing, then there is not only no figure, but no index either. So we must write it as 0 times 0, end quote. I don't quite know how Crowley comes to one conclusion if you're reading through the chapter, where he writes out 1 divided by 0, brackets n, so times 1 divided by 0 times n equals 8, where anything divided by 0 is not 0, but rather undefined. Regardless, we are not quite left with absolute 0 in any case, but simply something unknowable. Moving a bit ahead in the chapter, it ends with an explanation of the Taoist trigrams and helps with an explanation of their concept of the 0. Quote, point S. The Chinese, like ourselves, begin with the idea of absolute nothing. They make an effort and call it the Tao. But that is exactly what the Tao comes to mean when we examine it. They see quite well, as we have done above, that merely to assert nothing is not to explain the universe, and they proceed to do so by means of a mathematical equation even simpler than ours, involving, as it does, no operations beyond simple addition and subtraction. They say, nothing obviously means nothing. It has no qualities nor quantities. But, continues the sages of the Middle Kingdom, it is always possible to reduce any expression to nothing by taking any two equal and opposite terms. Thus, n equals negative n equals 0. We ought therefore to be able to get any expression we want from nothing. We merely have to be careful that the term shall be precisely opposite and equal. 0 equals positive n plus negative n. End quote. Thus, in Taoism, is symbolized this formula with the yin, a broken line, and the yang, an unbroken line. The yin being feminine, the yang being masculine. In Thelema, we have Nuit and Hadith, Babylon and the Beast, Binah and Hakma. Crowley makes mention of the combinations of these two lines, the 4 Hsiang, the 8 trigrams, the 64 hexagrams, which are all utilized in the Yi King divination system. They are in many ways equivalent to the symbols that you will find in the tarot in regards to a map of the universe, but so much more simple. Perhaps in the future I will do a full video on all these and map out what they create and what they show us and how one turns into the next, but for now we're going to gloss over that section. Quote, when you have assimilated these two sets of equations, the masculine and the feminine, when you have understood how 0 equals 2 is the unique, the simple, and the necessary solution of the riddle of the universe, there will be, in a sense, little more for you to learn about the theory of magic. You should, however, remember most constantly that the equation of the universe, however complex it may seem, inevitably reels out to 0. End quote. Love is the law, love under will. There are a few more paragraphs to the chapter, but they deal mostly with incarnation and lapses of memory after reincarnation. And I think that opens up a subject on existence a little too vast, in addition to what we've already discussed, so we're going to end this one here. I do hope to see you all in the next one. I have a few videos in the works. If you want to share my content, if you want to hit the like button, subscribe, do as thou wilt. And yeah, I'll catch you all soon.